Nobody saw all four coming. Not in one day. The Indiana Fever didn't ease into free agency. They detonated it. Within hours of the signing period opening, one name leaked before the ink was dry, two players were pulled straight from franchises that thought they were untouchable, and a veteran who has seen championship basketball up close decided Indiana was exactly where she needed to be. All of it happening while the rest of the league was still making phone calls. But to understand why this off-season hits different, you have to go back to where it started. Not the transactions. The conversation that made them unavoidable. Caitlin Clark didn't sit in a film room and quietly submit a list of needs to the front office. She said it on national television in front of millions of people with zero hesitation. She called Indiana the favorite to win it all. Not a contender. Not a team to watch. The favorite. That's a line that either ages beautifully or follows an organization forever, and everybody inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse knew it. That kind of public declaration does something to a front office that no closed-door meeting ever could. It removes the cushion. There's no soft landing if the roster build falls short. No explaining away a first-round exit when your franchise player already told the world what the standard was. Kelly Krauskopf, Amber Cox, and Stephanie White were operating without a safety net the moment those words left Clark's mouth, and the whole league was watching to see if they'd blink. They didn't. Here's the part that gets overlooked when the signing announcements start rolling in. Indiana came into this off-season carrying real vulnerability. 3 players under contract. 3. Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Mycala Timpson. That's a foundation, not a roster. Every other spot on this team was an open question, and several of those questions had urgency attached to them that the front office couldn't afford to ignore. The 2025 season showed exactly what the Fever were and exactly what they weren't. They had Clark running one of the most sophisticated offensive operations the WNBA had seen from a second-year player. They had Boston doing the dirty work inside, setting the tone physically, protecting the paint, and making the right pass every single time it mattered. But around those two, the gaps were visible on film and even more visible in the moments that decided close games. Size was an issue in the front court when Boston needed a real running mate instead of just bodies. Wings who could defend at a high level while still being a scoring threat were essentially non-existent. And when Clark or Mitchell needed a breather, the drop-off in backcourt decision-making was dramatic enough to shift momentum in games that should have been controlled. Every loss had a fingerprint. Every fourth-quarter wobble pointed back to the same roster holes. And when a team has a player the caliber of Caitlin Clark, roster holes don't just cost you games. They cost you the thing she came here to build. So, the Fever front office entered April 11, 2026, the first day of the official signing period, with a list that wasn't theoretical. It was surgical. Every move had to address something specific. Every dollar had to solve a real problem. And unlike off-seasons past, the phone was ringing in their direction for the first time in franchise history. That shift matters more than people realize. 4 years, Indiana was the team selling a vision, pitching a future, asking players to believe in something that hadn't happened yet. Now they're the team that has Caitlin Clark, one of the most electric players this league has ever seen, paired with Aaliyah Boston, one of the most complete two-way forwards in the game. The vision sold itself. The Fever stopped pitching and started choosing. What happened between midnight and sundown on April 11th was 4 roster holes disappearing one by one, each signing announced faster than the last, the roster taking a shape that looked nothing like the team that walked off the court last October. One contract makes history. One signing catches the entire league off guard. And none of it is finished yet. Let's break it all down. Before any new face walked through the door, Indiana had to answer one question first. And the answer cost them $1.4 million. Kelsey Mitchell re-signs with the Indiana Fever. 1 year. Supermax. The largest single contract in the history of this franchise, and the first $1 million deal Indiana has ever handed to any player in any era. That's not a transaction. That's a statement about what this organization has become and what it refuses to let walk out the door. But here's what the number doesn't tell you. Mitchell didn't have to be here. Let that sit for a second. She is a first-team All-WNBA guard coming off one of the best individual seasons of her career. She finished 5th in MVP voting. She made the All-Star roster. She was everything a team asks a player to be, and she did it on an expiring contract in a league that just restructured its entire pay scale under a new collective bargaining agreement. In plain terms, Kelsey Mitchell was one of the most attractive free agents available anywhere in the WNBA this offseason, and every front office with cap space knew it. The calls were coming. You don't have to speculate about that. A player at her level, at her age, with her skill set hitting open market in the first off-season under a new CBA? That's not a quiet situation. That's the kind of scenario where organizations start doing the math on what they'd have to give up in their own roster to clear the space to make a run at her. And some of them were doing exactly that math while Indiana was still finalizing the paperwork. The Fever moved before any of that could develop. They used the core designation under the new collective bargaining agreement, which gave Indiana exclusive negotiating rights and kept the conversation internal before it ever had the chance to become a bidding war. Smart, calculated, and executed without hesitation. Because the one outcome the Fever could not afford to build around was a Clark-Boston backcourt without Mitchell running alongside them. Here's why that backcourt is genuinely different from anything else in this league right now. Mitchell doesn't just make Indiana better. She makes Caitlin Clark harder to guard, and those are two completely separate things. When Mitchell attacks the paint downhill, she doesn't just create her own shot. She creates a decision crisis for every defense that tries to load up and stop her. Help arrives, the lane collapses, and suddenly Clark is standing wide open in exactly the spot she's most dangerous. When defenses try to shadow Clark through screens and deny her the ball early, Mitchell has a clear runway to the rim with nobody between her and the basket. There is no correct answer for a defense when both of them are operating at full speed. Every adjustment creates a new problem. That's not a backcourt pairing that's good on paper. That's a backcourt pairing that dismantles schemes in real time. And Mitchell makes it look effortless because she understands the geometry of it intuitively. She's not hunting her own stats while Clark runs the show. She's moving in a way that makes the whole system breathe. The spacing opens up. The second side actions connect. Boston's post touches become cleaner because the defense is already tilted sideways trying to account for what Clark and Mitchell are doing on the perimeter. Now add the loyalty dimension because it belongs in this conversation. Mitchell was in Indiana when the franchise was genuinely hard to watch. Not rebuilding but promising hard to watch. Genuinely, historically difficult. A 5-win season. Coaching changes stacking up one after another. Rosters that didn't give her much to work with. She stayed through all of it, not because leaving was impossible, but because she made a choice every single off-season to be somewhere that didn't deserve her patience yet. That's almost a decade of a player betting on a city before the city had any real reason to bet back. And now she's the first player in franchise history to sign $1 million contract. The symmetry of that is not lost on anyone paying attention. 1 year. Everything on the line. A ring or nothing. Mitchell didn't come back for security. She came back because this is the best shot she's ever had, and she knows exactly what she's looking at. The backcourt is locked. Now Indiana had to fill the rest of the roster before the rest of the league figured out what they were building. They didn't waste a single hour. The Mitchell signing closed one chapter. What happened next opened 3 simultaneously. And the league wasn't ready for any of them. Indiana didn't pause between announcements. There was no cooling off period, no gap where other teams could adjust or react. The Fever front office moved like an organization that had already made every decision weeks ago and was simply waiting for the clock to hit midnight on April 11th to make it official. By the time the rest of the league finished reading the Mitchell news, the next signing was already done. This is where the off-season goes from impressive to genuinely stunning. The first new face isn't just a free agent addition. She's a direct answer to the most glaring problem the 2025 Fever couldn't solve on film. Size. Real, physical, legitimate frontcourt size that can play alongside Aaliyah Boston without shrinking the floor or disappearing in big moments. Indiana needed a forward who could rebound at volume, hold position against the league's most physical interior players, and still move well enough to fit inside Stephanie White's offensive system. They found her. And they took her from a franchise that considered her foundational. That detail matters. There's a difference between signing a player another team let walk and signing a player another team fully intended to keep. Indiana did the latter. They identified a target that was supposed to be off the market, made a compelling enough case that she chose the Fever over returning to a team that had built around her, and got it done before anyone outside their own building knew it was happening. That's not roster management. That's a front office operating with genuine confidence. The second signing landed differently. This one had been circling for weeks in the rumor space, the kind of deal where enough people knew enough pieces that the full picture was almost visible before the announcement came. But almost isn't the same as confirmed, and when Indiana made it official, the reaction across the league was immediate. A wing. A legitimate two-way wing who can guard the opponent's best perimeter player on one end and create her own shot-off movement on the other. The exact profile Stephanie White had been trying to build into this roster since she took the job. The kind of player who doesn't demand the ball to be effective but absolutely punishes a defense the moment it loses track of her for even 2 seconds. She came from a franchise that has championship expectations every single season. A player who knows what a winning culture looks and feels like from the inside. Who has been in close games in October and understands what separates teams that go deep from teams that go home early. Indiana didn't just sign a wing. They imported winning culture from one of the most successful programs in the league and dropped it directly into a locker room that is still learning what sustained excellence requires. That's a move with consequences beyond the box score. The third signing was the one nobody saw coming in the way it happened. Not because the player was unknown. She is very much known. But because the timing, the structure, and the specific role Indiana designed for her told a story about how sophisticated this front office's thinking has actually become. A veteran guard. Not a star. Not a name that generates highlight packages. But a player with years of playoff experience, a reputation for making the right read under pressure, and a specific skill set that addresses the one moment in games where the 2025 Fever were most vulnerable. When Clark sits, Indiana needs someone who can run a half-court offense with enough competence to keep the lead from evaporating in 3 minutes. Not someone who tries to become Clark for 4 minutes and creates chaos in the process. Someone who understands her role precisely, executes it consistently, and hands the game back to Clark with the margin intact. That sounds simple. It is extraordinarily rare. The Fever found it, signed it, and in doing so, solved the rotation problem that cost them multiple games last season in the fourth quarter when the wrong lineup was on the floor at the wrong time. 4 signings. 4 problems from last season. All addressed before most teams had finished their first free agency phone call. But here's the part that should genuinely concern every other franchise in this league. Krauskopf and Cox went on record saying they aren't finished. More moves are coming. The roster Indiana is building isn't a retooled version of last year's team. It's a ground-up construction project aimed at one specific outcome in October. The Fever didn't just enter the championship conversation this off-season. They took over it. Let's stop celebrating for a second and actually look at what Indiana just built. Because when you lay it out piece by piece, position by position, and hold it up against the rest of the WNBA, something becomes very clear very fast. This isn't a team trying to compete for a championship. This is a team constructed specifically to win one. There's a difference and it shows up in the details. Start with the foundation that was already there before April 11th even arrived. Aaliyah Boston is quietly one of the 2 or 3 most complete forwards in professional women's basketball right now. She doesn't do one thing exceptionally well. She does everything at a high enough level that no single defensive strategy can neutralize her. She passes out of the post better than players who have been doing it for a decade longer. She rebounds on both ends without needing to be reminded. She defends without fouling. And she holds a locker room together in ways that never show up on a stat sheet but show up everywhere else. Boston was the steady center of gravity for this team through everything. Through the growing pains of Clark's rookie season, through the moments where the roster around them wasn't good enough, through the losses that stung and the wins that gave glimpses of something real. She was always there, always locked in, always exactly what a young team building towards something significant needs at its core. Now put everything Indiana just added around that foundation and watch what happens. The frontcourt pairing Boston now has alongside her changes the physical dynamic of this team entirely. Last season, Indiana could be bullied. Not consistently, not by everyone, but by the right team with the right personnel on the right night, the Fever's interior could be overwhelmed. That's gone now. The size Indiana brought in doesn't just address a weakness. It converts a liability into something opponents have to actively game plan around. That matters in a playoff series more than it matters in any individual regular season game. When you're playing the same team 4 times in 10 days, adjustments compound. Weaknesses get targeted repeatedly until they break or get solved. Indiana just solved the one that was most exploitable, and they did it by bringing in someone who has already been tested in exactly that environment. The wing addition reshapes the defensive identity of this roster in ways that may not be obvious until October. Perimeter defense in the WNBA playoffs is decided by whether you have wings who can stay in front of the league's best guards for 40 minutes across multiple games. Indiana didn't have that last season. They had effort and scheme and good coaching, but they didn't have the individual talent on the wing to lock down a true number 1 perimeter scorer when everything was on the line. They have it now. And when you pair elite perimeter defense with the offensive firepower this roster already possessed before a single free agent signed, you start to arrive at a genuinely uncomfortable conclusion if you're one of Indiana's competitors. There may not be a stylistic counter to what the Fever are putting on the floor in 2026. You can't slow down Clark by loading the paint because Mitchell will make you pay. You can't chase Clark off screens because Boston and the new frontcourt piece will punish you inside. You can't isolate Indiana's wings because the player they just signed was brought here specifically to win those individual battles. Every adjustment creates a new problem. That's what a championship roster feels like from the outside. Now layer in the veteran guard off the bench and what it does to opponent coaching staffs in late-game situations. Every team in the league spent last season identifying Indiana's rotation vulnerabilities and mapping out exactly when to apply pressure. They knew when Clark was resting. They knew when the second unit came on and the offense would stall. They built their game plans around those windows of opportunity. Those windows are closed now. When Clark sits, Indiana doesn't become a different team running a different system. They become a slightly less explosive version of the same team, running the same actions, making the same reads, protecting the same margin. That continuity is worth more than any individual stat the veteran guard will ever produce, because it removes the moments opponents were counting on to steal games. The rest of the league isn't just facing a better Indiana Fever. They're facing a version of this team that has answers everywhere they were looking for questions. Las Vegas still has Aaliyah Wilson. New York still has talent and depth. Seattle rebuilt quietly this offseason and shouldn't be dismissed. This league has enough firepower that no championship is guaranteed before a single game tips off. But right now, today, looking at what Indiana assembled in a single day of free agency against the backdrop of what they already had, the Fever are the team everyone else is building toward beating. That's a different position than this franchise has ever occupied. And they haven't even made all their moves yet. There's a version of this story where the pressure breaks something. Where the expectations pile up high enough, the public declarations become a burden instead of a fuel source, and the gap between what was promised and what actually happens on the floor becomes the only thing anyone remembers. That version of the story has happened before in professional sports, to players far more experienced than a third-year guard from Iowa who just told a national television audience that her team was going to win it all. Caitlin Clark said it anyway. And that tells you everything you need to know about where her head is right now. Because there's a specific kind of player who makes that statement and means it. Not the kind who says it because the moment called for confidence, not the kind who says it because a sideline reporter asked the right question at the right time and the words came out before the filter caught them. The kind who says it because they've already done the internal accounting, looked honestly at what they have, looked honestly at what the competition has, and arrived at a conclusion they're willing to defend publicly with their reputation on the line. Clark did that accounting. And she liked what she saw. But here's the thing about putting yourself in that position. It doesn't just change how the outside world looks at you. It changes how every single game of the 2026 season will be framed, analyzed, and remembered. Every loss will be evidence. Every close win will raise questions. Every moment where Indiana looks beatable will get amplified beyond its actual significance because the standard was set so publicly and so specifically that nothing below it reads as success. That's not a media narrative. That's a weight Clark chose to carry. Voluntarily. Out loud. The question worth sitting with isn't whether Indiana is talented enough to back it up. We've already established what this roster looks like and what it does to opponents on paper. The question is what happens to Caitlin Clark personally when the moment gets as big as she's made it. Year one she was a phenomenon. The attendance records, the television ratings, the cultural moment that extended far beyond basketball into something that sports doesn't produce very often. All of that was real and all of it was earned. But year one also had the protection of expectation management built into it. She was a rookie. The bar existed but it had flexibility. Year two that flexibility started to shrink. Indiana improved. Clark improved. The wins came more consistently and the moments where she looked like the best player on the floor became more frequent than the moments where the game seemed too big. The Fever were no longer a curiosity. They were a genuine contender and the league started treating them accordingly. Year three has no protection left. The roster is built. The co-star is locked in. The backcourt is intact. The frontcourt is reinforced. The wings are upgraded. The bench is addressed. Every single thing Clark asked for publicly has been delivered, and the delivery happened faster than anyone outside the organization expected. There are no more excuses available. There is no roster hole to point to when things get hard. There is no developmental arc to hide behind when a playoff series tightens up and the margin for error disappears. This is the team. This is the moment. And Clark is the one who told the world it was coming. What makes her different from players who crumble under that kind of self-imposed pressure is the same thing that made her different at Iowa, the same thing that made her different as a rookie, and the same thing that made her dangerous in year two when the league adjusted and she adjusted faster. She doesn't perform confidence. She operates from it. There's a version of confidence that's armor, something a player puts on before a big game to protect themselves from doubt. Clark's version is different. It's structural. It's the foundation the rest of her game is built on rather than something layered on top of it. When the moment gets bigger, she doesn't reach for composure. She already has it, because the size of the moment was already accounted for in the way she prepared for it. That's rare at any level. In a third-year player carrying a franchise's championship aspirations on her shoulders while the entire sports world watches, it's almost unprecedented. The Indiana Fever have built the roster. They've made the moves. They've answered every question the off-season asked of them and then added answers to questions nobody had asked yet. But championships aren't won in April. They aren't won on free agency day. They aren't won in the comment sections or the power rankings or the television declarations that get replayed on highlight shows. They're won in October. In fourth quarters. In moments where everything that was built over an entire off-season either holds together or it doesn't. Clark already told you what she expects. Now comes the part where Indiana has to prove it. Stop thinking about this as a single season. That's the mistake most people are making right now, getting caught up in the immediate roster moves, the free agency wins, the championship window that just swung wide open for 2026. All of that is real and all of it matters. But if you zoom out even slightly, what Indiana is constructing goes so far beyond one season that the 2026 championship conversation is almost the smallest part of the story. This franchise is being rebuilt from the identity up. And that process started long before April 11th. Go back 3 years and ask any honest analyst what the Indiana Fever represented in the WNBA landscape. The answer would have been uncomfortable. A franchise with history but no present tense relevance. A team that existed on the schedule the way some teams just exist, taking up a slot, filling out a bracket, providing opponents with a favorable spot in the standings. Players didn't dream about playing in Indiana. They ended up there. That's not an exaggeration. That's just the documented reality of where this organization was. What happened between that version of the Fever and the version that just executed one of the most aggressive single-day free agency runs in league history isn't just Caitlin Clark. Clark accelerated everything and amplified everything and made everything visible to an audience that had never paid attention before. But the infrastructure that allowed this off-season to happen the way it happened was being quietly assembled before Clark ever put on a Fever uniform. Krauskopf understood something that front offices in every professional league consistently underestimate. Culture isn't a byproduct of winning. It's a precondition for it. You don't build a winning culture after you start winning. You build it in anticipation of winning, in the years where the results don't justify the investment, in the moments where it would be easier to cut corners and easier to let standards slide because the standings don't reflect the effort anyway. Indiana built that culture in the dark. And when the lights came on, it was already there. Now consider what this roster looks like not just in October of 2026 but in the 2 or 3 seasons that follow. Clark signed a contract that keeps her in Indiana through a window that aligns with her absolute physical prime. Boston is the same age, the same trajectory, the same timeline. The core of this team isn't just good right now. It's structured to be good repeatedly, with enough cap intelligence built into the current construction to handle the financial realities that come with keeping elite players together long-term. The one-year structure on Mitchell's deal isn't just about this season's flexibility. It's about the conversation Indiana needs to have when Clark and Boston hit max eligibility under the new CBA's epic provision. Those negotiations will be the most consequential in franchise history, and the Fever are managing their cap position right now with that moment already in view. That's not reactive roster building. That's organizational thinking operating 2 and 3 moves ahead. And then there's the market dimension, which doesn't get discussed enough in the context of what Indiana is becoming. Indianapolis is not Los Angeles. It's not New York. It's not a market that has ever been considered a destination in professional sports the way coastal cities automatically get that label applied to them. For decades, being in Indiana meant working harder to recruit, working harder to sell the city, working harder to convince players that what the franchise offered compensated for what the market didn't. That calculus has inverted completely. When Krauskopf and Cox say that free agents are calling Indiana instead of the other way around, they're describing something that has genuine long-term market consequences. Because the players who call this off-season become the stories that recruit the next wave of players. The culture that gets built in 2026 becomes the thing the 2027 and 2028 free agents want to be part of. Championship infrastructure compounds the same way financial infrastructure does. Every win makes the next recruit easier. Every right culture decision makes the next right culture decision more likely. Indiana isn't just building a 2026 championship team. They're building an institution. The kind of franchise that other franchises study, that young players grow up wanting to join, that defines what a specific era of women's professional basketball looked like when historians eventually sit down to write it. That sounds like a large claim for an organization that hasn't won anything yet this decade. But look at what they just did in a single day. Look at the players they attracted, the deals they structured, the holes they filled, and the intelligence behind every single decision. Look at the public confidence of the franchise player and the matching confidence of the front office that built around her. This isn't a team hoping to win a championship. This is a franchise that has decided winning championships is simply what it does now. The rest of the league has been put on notice. The window is open. The roster is loaded. The standard has been declared publicly by the player who sets it. Everything Indiana has built across 3 years of quiet, unglamorous, foundational work is about to be tested against the best competition in the world under the brightest lights the league produces. And somehow, right now, today, looking at everything assembled and everything still coming, the Fever look ready for every single second of it. Here's where we land. 1 day, 4 signings, 0 hesitation. The Indiana Fever walked into the first day of free agency with a list, a standard, and a franchise player who had already told the world what the outcome needed to be. They walked out of it with every hole filled, every problem addressed, and a roster that looks nothing like the team that ended last season with unfinished business still sitting heavy in the locker room. That doesn't happen by accident. That doesn't happen because the moment was right or the stars aligned or the league's financial structure happened to work in Indiana's favor. That happens because an organization spent years building something real in the dark, before the cameras arrived, before the ratings exploded, before any of the outside world had a reason to pay attention to what was being constructed quietly in Indianapolis. Krauskopf built the infrastructure. Cox made the calls. White built the culture on the floor. Boston held the center when everything around her was still finding its shape. Mitchell stayed when staying was the harder choice. And Clark arrived and turned everything that was already there into something the entire sports world couldn't look away from. Every piece of this had to exist for the rest of it to work. Pull any single one out and the story changes. The roster doesn't come together this cleanly. The free agents don't call Indiana first. The confidence doesn't read as earned. The whole thing only works because every part of it was built intentionally and every decision pointed toward the same destination. Now the work shifts. The front office did its job. The roster is assembled. The moves are made. What happens between now and October belongs entirely to the players and the coaching staff and the moments that can't be scripted or planned for or controlled from a front office conference room. That's the part of championship building that can't be accelerated. The games have to be played. The hard nights have to be survived. The adjustments have to be made in real time by real people under real pressure with real consequences attached to every decision. Indiana has everything it needs to win a championship in 2026. The talent is there. The depth is there. The coaching is there. The culture is there. The hunger is there in a way that only comes from a franchise that has been close enough to smell it without getting there yet. But this league is too good and too deep and too full of competitors who want the exact same thing for any of this to be considered settled before a single jump ball. Las Vegas will be ready. They always are. New York has pieces that can make anyone uncomfortable on the right night. Seattle rebuilt with purpose and shouldn't be an afterthought in any honest championship conversation. There will be a team that emerges from somewhere unexpected and makes October harder than anyone predicted in April. That's what this league does. That's why it's worth watching every single game between now and the finals. But right now, today, with everything accounted for and everything laid out honestly, Indiana is the standard. Indiana is the team everyone else is measuring themselves against. Indiana is where the championship conversation starts and where it keeps returning no matter how many other names get added to the discussion. Caitlin Clark said they were going to be the favorite. The front office built a roster that makes that statement impossible to argue with. Now all that's left is the part that happens on the floor. And if you've watched this team, if you've watched Clark in the moments that define players, if you've watched Boston in the moments that define teammates, if you've watched Mitchell in the moments that define loyalty, you already know how they're going to approach it. All in. Every night. No excuses. No retreat. That's what Indiana is in 2026. That's what they built. That's what's coming. The only question left is whether you're going to be watching when it happens. If you made it this far, you already know the answer to that one. Drop your championship prediction in the comments right now. Don't just say Fever. Tell me who they beat, how many games it goes, and which player on this roster surprises everyone the most when October arrives. The best prediction gets pinned at the top. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is the moment. This Indiana Fever story is just getting started, And every move between now and the finals is going to be covered here first, broken down fully with nothing left out. Hit subscribe. Hit the notification bell. And come back when the next move drops. Because if today told us anything at all, it's that Indiana is not finished yet. Not even close.